Hello, everyone. Good morning from Santo Domingo. I'm putting my camera on so you can see me. Hi. Good morning from Santo Domingo again, and good afternoon and good evening for all of you in different parts of the world. My name is Elisabeth Robert. I am Capacity Development Analyst at the Young Women Training Center, and I'm very glad to welcome you today to this online session that we have titled Why Gender Equality is Critical to Achieving All 17 SDGs, the Case for Effective Mainstreaming. This will also serve as an introduction and an overview of the Gender Mainstreaming Blended Training, and that's a training that we will deliver starting September 2018. So moving on with our presentations, you will see on your screens a brief outline of what we will present for you today. Our expert panelists will begin the session explaining the gender mainstreaming concept using examples to illustrate what it is and what it is not gender mainstreaming. Then, we will go through the main points of the Global Monitoring Report, Turning Promises into Action, Gender Equality in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. That report highlights why is gender equality critical within the framework and what's the importance of effective mainstreaming for achieving our common goals. Following, we will provide a brief overview of the Gender Mainstreaming Blended Training, as we said, and this is offered by the Young Women Training Center and will start on September. And finally, we will have some time to answer some of your questions about today's session. So before we get started, it's important to talk a bit about the logistics of this webinar and how the platform works. So first, it is very important for us to have your feedback. And please note that you can type your doubts, questions, comments in the chat box at any time during today's presentation. The chatbot, you will find that at the right side of your screens, and it looks like the one that we have on the slide right now. We will compile the question during the session before we reach the final Q&A, the question and answer session. What means that the sooner you get the questions to us, it will be better and more likely that we can include them at the end. So we encourage you to send any pressing questions that you may have along the way and not waiting until the end. In the case that we're not able to address some of these questions during the session due to time constraints, we can follow up later by email. So if you're here, you already have my email address in the invitation to join the webinar, but it is also typed on your screens right now. Also, please note that the webinar is being recorded and that we're going to make it available through the UN Women Training Center YouTube channel once the session ends. It's here, the YouTube channel. Again, if you're here, you will receive it through email once the webinar ends, but you also have the address. And for easy access, you can just type UN Women Training Center YouTube on your Google or search engine. Finally, if you're experiencing any connectivity issues or low bandwidth, please know that you have the option to hide your webcams. This option is at the upper menu bar. You can see a screenshot also here on your slides. And which should be right now, everyone should be in the View Everyone mode. If you click on webcams, you can select the option Hide Webcams, and this way, the panelists and I will stop showing, and this should improve your connectivity issues right away. So we can move on now, and I am very glad to present today's panelists, who are Silke Staab and Elisabeth Robert. Silke works as a research specialist with UN Women New York, where she manages the Global Report on Gender Equality in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. She holds a PhD in politics from the University of Manchester and has an extensive experience researching and publishing on various aspects of gender, politics, and social policy. I believe Silke webcams is showing right now. You can say hi, Silke. And Elisabeth has been working in the Young Women Training Center since its creation in 2011. Currently, she coordinates courses on topics such as CEDAW, gender responsive budgeting, political participation, and migration. She has experience in social work, research, training, NGOs, in public institutions, and in the United Nations concerning, among other topics, local development, work insertion, and migration. So without further ado, I leave the floor to Elisabeth. Elisabeth, feel free to begin the presentation whenever you want. I'm providing right now controls for you.
Thank you very much, Letty, and good morning to everyone, or good afternoon or night. I don't know where you are connecting from. So the first I will do in 2 slides is to speak about what gender mainstreaming is, the basics, no? So first of all, let's say that the definition of gender mainstreaming was agreed in 1997, by ECOSOC. And the definition says that gender mainstreaming is the process of assessing the implications for women and men of any planned action, including legislation, policies, or programs in all areas and at all levels. It is a strategy for making women's as well as men's concerns and experiences an integral dimension of the design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of policies and programs in all political, economic, and societal spheres, so that women and men benefit equally and inequality is not perpetrated. So the ultimate goal of gender mainstreaming as a strategy and a process is gender equality. So gender equality, gender mainstreaming, is not about adding a woman's component or even a gender equality component into an existing activity. As we saw before, we have to think about it to do a gender analysis from the beginning when we are thinking about what we want to do. And it's not only about increasing women's participation. Nevertheless, it is bringing the experience, knowledge, and interest of women and men to bear on policy and development agendas. It's also to rethink and modify them so they will benefit women and men equally. It's also to transform social and institutional structure for greater equality. So it's a very broad overview of what gender mainstreaming is or not. And now Silke will illustrate that with some parts of the report we've done in UN Women. So Silke, I give you the floor.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. And thanks, Elisabeth, for the introduction into gender mainstreaming. I think that's really interesting because it's also actually the approach we take in the Global Monitoring Report, Turning Promises into Action, Gender Equality in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I'm trying to move on the PowerPoint slides, but don't seem to be able to do so. Could you do it for me, or?
Yes, Silke, I'm here. I believe you have mouse and control, but I can do it for you. There's a little arrow at the end of the below the presentation. I'll move on here.
Sorry, the arrow doesn't appear on my screen. Sorry about that.
That's okay, no worries.
So the approach of kind of mainstreaming gender and taking a gender lens on every goal, every target, every policy, every program, as Elisabeth mentioned at the beginning, is also the approach we take in the report. It's our take on the 2030 agenda, but it's worth also saying that it's the approach that member states have committed to when it comes to the 2030 agenda. So they did add a gender equality component with SDG 5, but they were also very clear in their declaration that gender matters and should be considered under all the other goals. So the report Turning Promises into Action was launched in February 2018, so just very recently. It's UN Women's Global Monitoring Report. and really the first of its kind to look at gender equality across the whole of the 2030 agenda and across all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So if we go to the next slide, we provide in the report, obviously, a very detailed account of the status of women and girls under SDG 5, the goal that is dedicated to gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. But we also show that gender inequalities remain pervasive in each of the other 16 goals. And we argue that progress for women and girls is critical for achieving the 2030 agenda as a whole and for making progress on many of the other goals outside of SDG 5. And I just want to give you a couple of examples. The first example on the next slide is that enhancing women's access to resources is essential for the elimination of poverty, for better education, health and nutritional outcomes, especially for children, and for the achievement of inclusive growth. And so what we found looking at new data for poverty, that calculations that we did together with the World Bank, is that across the world, women are about 4% more likely to live in extreme poverty than men. But an even more unsettling finding in a way emerges when we look at specific age groups, which is what you see on the slide. So where the blue and the red lines part ways, that is the age group of 25 to 34 years old, and we see that the gap in extreme poverty between women and men widens significantly in this age group. So for every 100 men in this age group, we have 122 women who live under $1.90 a day. And why is that? So these years are key peak productive years where many women and men are in the labor market earning a living to sustain themselves and their families. But there are also critical reproductive years where many of them have small children to support and to look after. And the fact that in this particular age group, women are so much more likely to be affected by extreme poverty than men really shows that that the burden and responsibility for reconciling this productive and reproductive realm falls disproportionately onto their shoulders. And so this is something that we also need to consider in the policy responses for ending poverty under SDG 1. Moving on to the next slide on where I combined a little bit SDG 5 and SDG 16 is that it's pretty clear that eliminating violence against women and girls, one of the targets under SDG 5, is a precondition for creating peaceful and inclusive societies, which is SDG 16, as well as achieving many of the other goals of the agenda. And yet the report shows that violence against women and girls is rampant across countries and regions. It is one of the most pervasive human rights abuses in the world today, with 1 in 5 women, or 19%, globally having experienced physical and or sexual violence at the hands of their intimate partners in the past 12 months. And the final example I want to give is more from the environmental realm. So on the next slide, looking at SDG 15 on deforestation, we see that between 2010 and 2015, the world lost 3.3 million hectares of forest areas. And people often think that's a serious, and rightly so, a serious environmental issue, as it also, triggers climate change and reinforces climate change and other things. But people rarely think about it as a social and a gender issue. And in the report, we show that deforestation affects poor rural women, and especially those from landless households in rural areas, particularly because they have roles in cooking, cattle care, and related tasks that make them depend on forests for collecting firewood, fodder, and also small food items for daily survival. At the same time, women's specific knowledge and dependence on forest makes them key contributors to conservation and regeneration, and evidence shows that where a critical mass of women participates in the management of forests and other natural resources, the governance of these resources improves, and preservation and regeneration are fostered, supporting long-term environmental and also social sustainability. So these are some of the examples of the analysis we've done across the goals, and the report goes through all 17, taking a spotlight approach, showing a statistic, a gender relevant statistic for each of the 17 goals and target by target on SDG 5. But we also provide a policy agenda for action that is relevant to mainstreaming. So on the next slide, I've put together an overview of the 3 pillars that we think are critical for mainstreaming gender equality into policies, programs, monitoring and evaluation associated with the 2030 agenda. Transformative policies, better data, and greater accountability are these 3 pillars. And again, I just want to give a few snippets of what we're talking about in these 3 areas. So about transformative policies, on the next slide, I chose the example of quality childcare services, an example of a transformative policy that would not, if it's rightly done and gender is adequately considered in this policy, it would not only benefit women, but also contribute to the achievement of a series of other goals and targets. For example, it could help reduce the time women spend on unpaid care and enable them to participate more in paid employment. It could create jobs in the social service sector, so childcare jobs in particular, and it would contribute to children's development, particularly among children from disadvantaged backgrounds, and therefore also to reducing inequalities, which is SDG 10 and not even on this slide. But in order to play this role, services really need to be designed with gender equality in mind, and in particular this means with the needs of working parents in mind in terms of the location, the opening hours, vacation schedules, etc. And they need to be of high quality and provide decent work for the childcare workers, most of whom are women in the majority of countries. And then really we're talking about a policy that can play a catalytic and very synergistic role across the agenda as a whole. The next pillar on the next slide, oh no, sorry, I forgot. So what we also did in the report, just to give you a glimpse, is to look at, that's on the next slide actually, what it would cost to extend free childcare services for children under the age of 5 in a couple of countries, South Africa, Uruguay, and then later also Turkey. And what we show is that there is a significant initial gross annual investment of 3.2% of GDP, and that's a significant fiscal outlay. But we also calculated that the potential returns of this investment are very high. So the expansion, the universal availability of childcare services would not only create 2 to 3 million new jobs, it could also raise the female employment rate by 10 percentage points in a country where unemployment among women and men is a huge problem. And the new tax and social security revenue from those jobs that would flow back into the public purse would help recover more than 1/3 of the initial fiscal outlay, meaning that the actual net new investment is only 2.1% of GDP. Moving on to the second pillar, so this is an example of transformative policies and financing those. Moving on to better data, which is another important pillar of mainstreaming because it enables effective monitoring and evaluation. And there are huge challenges when it comes to the 2030 agenda. I think that's not new to anyone. Currently, for example, 6 out of the 17 SDGs have no official indicator to monitor progress for women and girls explicitly. And that's particularly true for the environmental goals, including water and energy, which are goals that we know for a fact matter hugely for women, for gender equality, and where women play a significant role in terms of collection of water, collection of firewood, and so on, and also the transition into renewable energy. In addition, what we see on the next slide is that 23% of the data needed to monitor the gender-specific indicators that we do have in the 2030 Agenda framework is from 2010 or later, meaning that it's recent and can tell us something about where we currently stand. And only 16% of that gender data is available for 2 or more points in time, meaning that we can actually monitor trends over time. So if we're serious about mainstreaming, we need to ensure that gender data are collected and updated on a regular basis so we can actually monitor progress for women and girls. And then finally, we are of course aware that even with better data and significant progress on the statistical front, on the next slide, we see that the data that becomes available needs to be used to shape public action. And this really is the third pillar of effective mainstreaming, creating effective mechanisms for accountability for gender equality commitments. Because where women are unable to participate, where the right incentives are in place to advance gender equality, and where poor performance on women's rights has consequences, better outcomes are possible. And so to conclude, I think the 2030 agenda is not only a huge opportunity for gender mainstreaming, it's really a must, because without it, we will not succeed to achieve our goals by 2030 and for all, given that women are half of the world's population. And so I hope this also gives you an incentive to check out our report. Below is the link, and I'm handing back to Elisabeth and happy to answer any questions that come up later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Silke, for this interesting presentation, and Elisabeth as well. I have some questions from the audience. I'm putting it on screen right now. Oh, I'm sorry, I was missing one of the slides, Elisabeth. So please go on and talk about the gender mainstreaming training.
Thank you very much, Silke. It's always very interesting to see the information of this report. So now I want to present the course we will have on gender mainstreaming. So as you can see in the screen, we will have, it's blended. No, blended means that we have an online part and then a face-to-face part. The online part will be from 17 of September to 12 October, and the face-to-face 15 to 19 of October. It will be in Istanbul. The fee is $2,000, and this only, I would say, include the participation in the course and the coffee breaks. That means that your flight and hotel it should be covered by the participants. So maybe I speak a little bit about the course first. It was piloted in 2017 and peer-reviewed by the Economic Empowerment section in UN Women, by UN Women Training Center and UN Women Regional Advisors from Asia Pacific and East Central Africa. The objective of this course is to strengthen capacity of UN system, development organizations, governments, and other stakeholders to mainstream gender in public policies, programs, and projects, and also in institutions and organizations. We are working on this new edition, and we will particular attention will be put on intersectionality and diversity, on data and statistics, and on transformative leadership for gender equality in this new edition. Some of the contents will include current development context, gender equality in the SDGs and the 2030 agenda, global commitments for gender equality, rationales for gender mainstreaming, what is gender mainstreaming, the added value of gender mainstreaming, and also gender mainstreaming in programs and project cycle, public policies, and institutions or organizations. So we will work on gender analysis, data and statistics for gender equality, formulating results for gender equality, gender responsive budgeting, also the process of implementation, monitoring, evaluation, and reporting on gender mainstreaming within the sectoral approach and organizations, and transformational leadership, organizational culture, human resources, staff accountability and incentives for gender mainstreaming, financial resources, and budget. So this is an overview of the contents of the course. Registrations to this course is open until 12 August. So to register in the course, we ask you to enter in the campus and to our portal. You have the link here in the screen. You have to fill a form, and then after August 12th, we will come back to you and see if you continue to be interested and do all the logistics so that we can start the course. In case people from the same organization take the course together, we have discounts for groups from 4 and more people. So I think I covered all the information I have on the course, but I'm happy to respond to any question. So now you have the floor, Letty.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Elisabeth, and thank you again, Silke. I just wanted to say before we move on with the questions that we're having a lot of participation today, a lot of questions, which is great. Thank you so much for sending them over. And also that we have people from all around the world. They had said hello from Spain, Brasilia, Philippines, Brussels, Sri Lanka, Macedonia, Haiti, Thailand, just so you have an idea of the kind of audience we have today. So thank you, that's great. So we have, as I said, a lot of questions. We have to select some of them. We will not be able to answer them all online during this session today, but we will follow up to all of you through email. So I will start with some questions regarding the training, Elisabeth. So I believe these first ones are for you. The first one says, may I be eligible for the blended training? I am not UN staff. It's from Mukesh Umar.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, this course is open for all audiences. You could be from a government, UN staff, a civil organization, or maybe you make part of an organization and you want to start working on gender equality. So the audience is very broad. I don't know here, we don't know where you are from, but yes, this course is open to all audience.
Yeah, absolutely. As we also work mainstreaming in organizations, in all kinds of organizations, even for the private sector. So yeah, that's great, Elisabeth. The second one, I included it because we have received many questions about this presentation and the slides. Know, please, that this is being recorded and it will be shared with all of you through email and also uploaded to our YouTube channel, the UN Women Training Center YouTube channel. So yes, you will have access to this presentation. And the third question, Elisabeth, is, are there scholarships for the gender mainstreaming course? It's from Claricia.
Yes, for the question 2, I would say also that they can access the report. We can send the report in the email we will send, maybe.
Okay, absolutely. Yes, we can send the report.
In fact, it's very interesting to read it. So the scholarships, unfortunately, we don't have scholarships. But as I said, if you are at least 4 people from the same organization, then we would do a discount, because we feel it's a very good thing if we have a group within an organization that take the same training, so that they can I would say they can start some changes in the organization, maybe easier if they are a group, no, instead of only one person.
Correct. Thank you. So the fourth one is, how do we register for this training? If you can quickly refresh that, Elisabeth.
Okay, so the training center has a portal. So I think we have the link in the presentation, but also you will receive it. So you have to enter in that link that Leticia is showing. and you have to put in English language and click in the menu in the second item, which is trainings. And here you will see all the list of trainings we are offering. So you search for a gender mainstreaming course, you click on it, and you will have the information and a button, as you see in the screen, application form. You click on the application form, you fill the information we ask for, and then we will be screening your application and we will come back to you. Also note that payment can be done through the platform, but we can do it in another way also, but we can do it through the platform.
Excellent. So also remembering all users that they can contact us through, well, my email that you already have, or info@trainingcenter.unwomen.org in case you have any doubts in the process of registering. We have one last question regarding the logistics of the training. It says, if I'm not able to cover the cost of the blended training on my own, can I still take the course online without the face-to-face training in Istanbul? And well, if you offer scholarship, that you already replied, Elisabeth.
Okay, so unfortunately, I would say no, because we start with the group and then, you know, it's like a process with the group. Nevertheless, we have many self-paced courses in the portal that you can look at. We have really many of them now in the series of I Know Gender course. So you have to check the 3 first courses, which are basics. And then you have gender and migration, gender and infrastructure, gender and economics. What do we have, Letty? We have so many of them in different languages also. So I think, and those courses are free. So I think you can take those courses, no?
Yes.
There are many other topics, no?
We encourage you to see our options that if you join Young Women Training Center webpage, you will see on the training tab. So we have many options that are exclusively online. Our blended trainings require both online and face-to-face sessions, so they are mandatory. So that's perfect, Elisabeth.
And
thank you so
those
much.
self-paced courses are for free. So that's
we have many self-paced courses for free. That's right.
Mm.
So going to question number 6, we have Nafisa asking, what types of data or information is valuable or key to gender mainstreaming? So Silke, I believe this question would be for you.
Sure. So, I mean, this may sound very obvious, but it's really not so obvious when you look at the actual data availability. The most critical data is data that is disaggregated by sex. And for many, many areas that are relevant to the SDGs, we still do not have that data, even at the national level. In addition to disaggregation by sex, I think it's also very important to disaggregate by other characteristics. So in chapter 4 of our report, for example, we do a whole statistical analysis of the commitment to leave no one behind, showing how women and girls of particular groups, rural, low income, specific ethnicities or racial groups, etc., face particular disadvantages and are really at the highest risk of being left behind. So I think data disaggregation is a really huge challenge. And then the other thing I would say is that it's really important to look at outcome indicators when you do gender mainstreaming, as well as process indicators. So you want to look at, how many women participated in a particular active employment program, but you also want to see whether that has actually translated into better access to employment after the program has been carried out, to just give one example.
Thank you, Silke. Elisabeth, do you have anything to add to this?
No.
Perfect. So just reinforcing that what you mentioned early, we will also send the report in our follow-up email as it seems to be very relevant for all our audience. So moving on to number 7, it says, how relevant is gender mainstreaming for achieving the migration-related SDGs, from Eric? So, Silke, what would you say?
So I think that's a really, really good and important question. And my first response to that would be migration is another, I think, thing that is it's not only a specific goal or target, it's something that we need to think through all the goals, and we need to think it together with gender, because women are, half of the world's migrant stock. And they are, they face particular risks, they make particular contributions. So, for example, if we look at SDG 8 on decent employment, women make up the majority of, migrant domestic workers that in many, many countries, and I know the training center has also done really good work on this, face very hard working conditions and are not enabled to access to decent work as SDG 8 mandates us to. So I think it's, gender is critical to migration. It's a critical component to migration, but migration, I think we also need to look at throughout different SDGs.
Can I add something?
Absolutely, Elisabeth, go ahead.
Yes. In fact, you have a very good, let's say, flyer of IOM to see which SDGs are related to migration or vice versa. So for instance, you have a 4B for scholarships, so students mobility, that's a kind of migration, it's not labor migration. You have also the 5.2 on trafficking. And then as Silke said, you have the 8, I think, migrant workers' rights. Then you have the 10, all well-managed migration policies. This is a very important one. And you have 10C on remittances, trafficking, global partnerships. Also, migration is also present in all the SDGs. So in fact, we are developing a self-paced course on gender and migration to show all the gender dimension in all the migration cycle. No, what is important also is to mainstream migration in other policies, health policies, education, etc. So this is how to mainstream gender in migration and how to mainstream migration in other policies, I would say.
Thank you both so much for your replies. Okay, moving on to number 8. Are other genders taken into consideration in the gender mainstreaming strategy rather than just men and women? And this question is from Julia. Whoever of you want to start to reply?
I can start.
Yes, please, Silke, go on.
I think, again, that's a really, really good and important question. The report focuses mainly on women and men because we're limited by what official statistics give us. A lot of times we don't even have that disaggregation. So we try to work with that disaggregation wherever we have it. The report has a whole chapter that is more on kind of the methodological aspect of monitoring, where we also have a section that discusses the lack of data really on specific groups. So they're completely invisible in official statistics, and that includes, for example, transgender people, etc. So there's actually very little we can say by the way of official statistics on genders other than men and women.
Yes, nevertheless, we are intending as UN Women not to work more on LGBTI population. So that will be covered in the course. I'm not a specialist on this issue, but the facilitators will cover that.
And we make a strong call in the report to strengthen data on these groups, with a caveat that this needs to be done very, very wisely and very carefully, because these are, as we know, also often groups that are subject to harassment and violence. So we need to also protect their identity and be very, very careful when we collect and make data available. Also, because often it's smaller populations that are more easily identifiable than as individuals.
Thank you both so much, and Julia for the important questions. So moving on to number 9, on the poverty difference between men and women of different ages. Has this been mapped with the rural/urban split? And this is from Sharon.
So for the report, we worked mainly on the age disaggregation, but we continue to work with the World Bank on that database. That's a fairly new database, so I'm not entirely sure how much more there is that can be mined. We published a working paper and a brief on the first kind of round of data analysis we did. I don't think that rural urban was in there because I remember looking for it for this year's Commission on the Status of Women, which was on rural women. But we'll see how that proceeds as we continue to work with the World Bank on that database.
Thank you, Silke. Elisabeth, do you have anything to add?
No.
Great. So number 10, regarding the 15th SDG, how is the data collected and analyzed to the conclusion that when women are involved in reforestation, we have better results? This is from Carolyn, and I believe it is for you, Silke.
So this is based on a series of studies that have kind of piled up over the last, I would say, 20 years. That are mostly on specific natural resource management programs and projects. So they're usually more qualitative with quantitative components. They're not national statistics or global statistics, but they're based on case studies. And some of the most influential work in this area was done by Bina Argawal. But there are other kind of authors who have replicated this work and found similar things, and the bibliographic references are in the report if you're interested.
Yes, Elisabeth, do you have anything to add? Thank you so much, Silke. So number 11 says, can you please add some points from the monitoring perspective of gender mainstreaming from Vishnu? So some points from the monitoring perspective of gender mainstreaming. What would you say?
Do you want to start, Elisabeth, or?
I'm not sure that I the perspectives. So is it about data collection and then how to monitor? I'm not sure.
Yes, or well, the way I understand it is maybe the future of monitoring through gender mainstreaming, which is also like addressed by the report. So maybe Vishnu, if you can clarify your point, I can and then read it again. And
no, maybe I guess maybe it's related to what Silke was saying with the lack of data to be able to monitor. So there is also a huge project with UN Women, no, on statistics, gender and statistics. I don't know if Silke can add on this.
So I think one thing, interpreting freely this question until we have further clarity. I mean, I think one thing that is really important to understand. Monitoring is often, it includes data and indicators. So we need indicators to be able to track what is happening over time in different areas where you want to have gender equality mainstreamed. And the development of these indicators and to develop meaningful indicators for that is actually a huge challenge. And a lot of times it's something that statisticians cannot do on their own because they're not experts in the specific area that we want to look at, like environment or labor market, or there's so many different areas. And so where we don't have established indicators, it's really important to do some conceptual work and to analyze more qualitatively first, how does gender play out in these areas? So similar to what we've done under SDG 15, to kind of say, what do we know from other evidence? Because we don't have quantitative indicators right now about how gender plays out in these areas, how women and men are differently affected by deforestation, climate change, or other things. And then try to think about what would be a good quantitative indicator that can capture that. And that actually is quite a bit of work. And I think also when mainstreaming gender in public administration, that's one of the really key points. You want to get to an indicator that really is meaningful and says something and can help you then assess progress on that front.
Yeah.
And on the, I don't know if I can say
yeah, maybe
on the
to add on that, it's also monitoring, as you said, public expenditures, no, related to, because we have a policy, but then we have to be sure that the policy is implemented. So here, gender responsive budgeting is entering, no, with also all the methodology to be able to mainstream gender in all the budget.
Excellent. So I have a comment from Vishnu.
Sorry, I cut you, Silke. I think.
Yes, no, I just wanted to say that that Vishnu says thank you that we answered his question. That it was actually indeed about how to do more support for data collection for monitoring. So that's great.
Yes, there is a huge effort to work with the statistic entities. You know, the entities at national level who works on statistics to improve, no, the disaggregation of data, at least.
Yeah, so UN Women has is in the middle of a big program called Making Every Woman and Girl Count. And as part of that program, we're working a lot with national statistical offices to strengthen data collection and use of gender statistics. So not only to improve the data that is available, but a lot of times you have data that you're sitting on, especially administrative sources, for example, that are not mined or evaluated on a regular basis because there are no funds or there is no capacity. And so that is something that that program aims to address.
Thank you both so much. I just wanted to remind the audience that we are running out of time and we're going to reply these 2 questions, but we have received all of your questions and comments. People, it's participating very, very much. So thank you so much for this active participation and listening. So going with number 12, Elisabeth and Silke, what would the ways to make those information and cases available for public? What would be the ways? Ordinary people don't see any connections among those issues, such as deforestation and poverty, etc. It's from Ebru. So I don't know if you want to begin with this question, Silke or Elisabeth. How to make the link more visible, maybe. It's a
I'm thinking about communications, which maybe you could also participate, Laetitia, as you work on communications. But yes, life stories, case studies. For instance, in our self-paced courses, there are a lot of examples. So really, you can understand the connection. I don't know, Silke, if you have a series of communications projects based on the report, for instance, or.
So I think there are 2 challenges. I mean, one is the typical mainstreaming challenge. So a lot of people, even, in public administration, do not have these linkages on their radar. Even, if we look at the environmental goals, as I said, there are no gender specific indicators. So it wasn't, those interconnections weren't strongly on the radar of those who worked on these environmental goals and conceived those environmental goals. I would think the same is true for a lot of public administrations. So on the one hand, there's the challenge of bringing it into kind of the mainstream. And I think that's partly what we're aiming at with our report as well, and with related products such as policy briefs and data briefs. We have a huge social media kind of outreach strategy that we did alongside the launches, and we hope it reaches more kind of the broader public. But for public administrations, what we hope to do and have partly already done with some of our country offices is hold policy dialogues and really get people who work in sectoral ministries to get to think about these issues more. And then there is kind of the second challenge, I think, is the broader communication to ordinary people, which I think is, as Elisabeth says, a lot by combining data and evidence with kind of more a human face that makes people kind of connect in real life to these linkages.
I feel also that a big effort has to be made to have people from government, civil society, maybe international organization to sit together, as you said. What civil society can do is so important, to make the case. For instance, if we speak about migration and the migrant domestic workers, it's a huge movement that they have, and for the ILO Convention 189, for instance, so for the rights of women domestic workers. So and sometimes we can see that some initiatives come a lot from, for instance, the government, and then the challenge is to also hear from the civil society, and it was one of the big point of your presentation, also the accountability and the participation of civil society, so that they can tell about their reality. They have a space to speak about that.
And can I just to add to that, I think the environment is actually an area where this is happening. I mean, women are at the forefront of very many environmental movements, including indigenous women on land rights and against land expropriations, and against kind of the destruction of their natural environment. So I think that is happening, and there is a critical mass of kind of civil society activity led and where by women or where women participate actively, that kind of engages with particularly environmental issues. And I think to give those greater prominence and bring them into the official processes would be very beneficial.
Yes, thank you both. I agree completely. I would just like to add that, as you said, Elisabeth, there's a huge, well, and Silke as well, outreach strategy and communication strategy to provide this vision. No, we have this framework, the SDG framework, that has mainstream gender into all different areas. But I also wanted to talk about well, training as the possibility of generate awareness between all sorts of people, and the work that not only we do that, but we can all do with some of these resources. Awareness raising is one of the words that we always use. It's like one of the starting points, and I truly believe that once that you're aware, you cannot be indifferent. So I think it is also about that, how to being more sensible to these connections.
Campaigns also, we have the campaigns, for instance, he for she, or to end violence against women. But what I personally feel is that there is more acceptance of the fact that gender inequality exists, and it's important to talk about it. But now people ask a lot on how to do it. So we have to make the case, but we have also to speak on how we can do that, be more inclusive. How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. And also even the participation to this very seminar also reflects how this is being more awareness is wider, and how this is an important issue for everyone right now. So we have almost run out of time, but we have time for the last question. And it is how to best advocate for gender mainstreaming within an organization. So it has to do a bit with what we were talking about, but specifically within the context of an organization. It's from Danielle. Would you like to comment on that, Silke? Or Elisabeth, who of you want to start?
You want to start, Elisabeth? I hope that's part of your course. That's kind of the...
But it's also a whole course. There is a 5-day course offered by the training center on transformative leadership for gender equality. It's 5-day course with an approach that you can find in internet. Is Gender at Work, who is working on this methodology. So I think we cannot in 1 minute say that. What we see, what we understand is that each person in an organization has to be aware, as we said before, but you need also to change the culture and the processes within an organization, so that you have you want to be more inclusive, but you have to put in place some processes that make that possible. For instance, you could have a department dedicated to gender mainstreaming or gender focal points, as we have, for instance, in United Nations. In each agency, we have a unit dedicated to gender issues, but then we have to mainstream all over the organization. So there are a lot of resistances. It can be culture, it can be resistance because of power. I mean, the fear of losing power. It can be then financial resistances, because we assume that working on gender equality would cost more money. So there's a lot of issues to cover, no?
Maybe just to add kind of more on the framing and advocacy side. I mean, I think there's always that delicate balance in how you advocate for mainstreaming gender and for gender equality in different areas. And, you know, one of the ways I think that people do this is by saying, if you invest in gender equality, right, that's good for everyone and you'll get all these benefits and it's smart economics, or it's, you know, this or that. And I think that's an important strategy, but I think it needs to go hand in hand with also just saying, you know, women and girls are half of the world's population. And so if you miss out on their experiences and on their struggles, then you're really missing out on a big, you know, on half of the population, and their rights are critical. So to kind of balance this more kind of, I want to convince you, you know, and it's kind of, you know, beneficial to the economy or whatever, but also to just say it's a right, you know, gender equality and non-discrimination are enshrined in universal human rights. And that alone should already be an impetus, even in areas where maybe, you know, there are economic costs to advancing gender equality.
Well, now we officially have run out of time. So thank you, Elisabeth and Silke, so much for being here with us today, and also to all our participants and for staying on throughout the whole Q&A session as well. I just wanted to remind you that you can check all of these resources we have commented on at trainingcenter.unwomen.org, and you can contact us at any time with your questions. And that you will receive an email with the recording and the report and everything that we had talked about. So thank you both so much, Silke and Elisabeth, again.
Thank you very much. Happy to have so many people connected. And I hope we keep in contact.
And I hope you all sign up for the course.
We had courses for 10 years. Bye-bye.
Well, bye-bye, and thank you again.
Bye.